at daybreak, filling his glove with peanuts, or maybe a mulberry bush covered in golden rings, or perhaps Ray Davis out of Kinks, shoving a duvet into a bread bin. Well, I'll tell you what could be more lovely. Nick Redfern.
I've got this. Thanks. Oh, thanks, everybody. Is this on?
No, Nick, that's for me. That's for the camera.
Oh. Oh, okay. Got it. Well, I'm wired up like a robot with all sorts of things. So.
Nicholas, half the people here have read Steven Secret Monsters and know that they're wired up all the time.
Yeah, I am wired up all the time. Right, well, I've got 30 minutes to tell you about the British equivalent of that thing, Bigfoot. And, you know, people, I guess, are kind of amazed when you actually talk about the so-called British Bigfoot. And, you know, people ask me, do I think there's actually like a wild, crazy, hairy behemoth roaming around England? Well, actually he is, and he runs the Centre for Fortean Zoology. His name's John Downs. But the big question is there another giant hairy creature running around England as well that sort of broadly fits the description of that? Well, we definitely get reports from England, Scotland, Wales, of hairy creatures that would sort of broadly fit the Bigfoot description. The problem with a lot of the British reports is that when you look into them, they're not as straightforward as a lot of the American ones, or shall we say like the Yeti in the Himalayas, or the Chinese reports, or the Yowie in Australia. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the British sightings, reports, encounters seem to have odd little tales connected to them, weird folk tales, or there's like a ghost story attached to them, or maybe in the location where the creature was seen, something else was also going on, like a ghost encounter, weird activity, UFOs, where it's not just as straightforward as somebody seeing this wild, hairy man, if you like. And on top of that, of course, you've got the scale of England, you know, a country 900 miles long, allegedly, if these reports are true, populated by some sort of race of man-beast. Now, you know, people say, quite legitimately, I suppose, in some respects, something like that could conceivably hide out, I suppose, in a large English forest, just about. But because reports have gone on for literally 1,000 years, at least in England, there would have to be a viable population to allow these things to flourish, reproduce, and exist. And the idea that, you know, a whole tribe, if that's the right word, species of creatures that look like that roaming around England for 1,000 years, 10,000 years, and never be found, never be caught, that just kind of defies description. And there's just no way that something that size could exist here at all and not be caught. It's just impossible. So the question then becomes, if it's not a physical animal, at least in the sense that we understand it, what is it that people are seeing? Is it just, you know, an apparition? Is it something that interdimensional, you know, for whatever that means? Is it something else? And that's sort of one of the questions that I've dug into quite recently, or quite regularly over the course of about the last 20 years, on and off. And I think there's probably somewhere in the region of about probably 30 or 40 independent reports of people having seen sort of large hairy creatures in England that would fit that description. And I've interviewed a number of people firsthand, and the reason why I got interested in this particular avenue was because of this story, the man monkey. The man monkey is a case that goes back to 1879, and it relates to an incident that occurred on the Shropshire Union Canal. And January 1879, there was this guy going home late at night with a horse and cart, and he was crossing the bridge that crosses the Shropshire Canal, and suddenly, out of nowhere, jumped this wild, hairy creature. And it wasn't described as anything this big, it was more like about 5 feet tall, like a skinny monkey-type animal. And he reported how it supposedly jumped on the cart. As you can see from this picture that Mark North put together for the book cover, the story was that this creature jumped out at this guy on a horse and cart, threw the guy to the ground, and this creature was just wildly waving its arms. And the guy got a whip with him for the horse, and as he struck the creature, the whip went straight through it. So again, this is like another indication that whatever these things are, they're not what they seem to be at first glance. They seem to be something else entirely different, almost spectral in nature. So with this particular case, where it occurred was actually about 10 miles drive from where I used to live. And so investigating this case was one that I thought would be a good one to look into, because it was an interesting story and actually was some background to the tale, and it actually wasn't that far away. And that's the book that the story was first published in, called Shropshire Folklore by Charlotte Byrne. And this was published in the early 1880s. And it recounts this story of the guy going home late at night, January 1879, seeing this huge hairy creature, or large hairy creature, jumping out, and him getting scared out of his wits, and he went just back to the local pub, told people in the area. And the story spread like wildfire throughout the villages of Woods Eaves and Ranton, which are the two closest little villages. And Ranton actually has a distinction of being the location of a very famous UFO encounter in 1954 involving a woman named Jessica Rustenberg, who said she saw a UFO with creatures over the property she lived in at the time. And there have been all sorts of other weird activity in Ranton, black cat sightings, fairy encounters, all sorts of things like that. So it's sort of like a real hotbed or window area for strange activity. You won't be able to read that there, but that's the page in the book where it talks about the case, and that's another picture of the scene. Now that's Bridge 39 on the Shropshire Canal, on Shropshire Union Canal. And, you know, most canals in England, you just imagine like a stretch of water with flat ground either side. The Shropshire Union Canal is completely different, as you can see. Where you've got the bridge at the top, that's the roadway. That's a distance down of about 35 to 40 feet. And as you can see, the entire canal is enveloped by thick woods and forests. And that is the case for probably about 10 miles either way of where that photograph's taken. It's just thick forest land. And it was while the guy was going across that piece of roadway that he saw this creature, attacked him, etc., etc. And there hasn't really been too much of an investigation done into this particular case. Charlotte Byrne, who wrote about it in the early 1880s, just simply recounted the facts as they were known at that particular time. And she suggested it was some sort of animal ghost. And this is one of the intriguing things that surfaces time and time again in these British Bigfoot type reports, is that people have described seeing weird apes in the woods, but a lot of them seem to have folkloric tales attached to them about ghostly apes. There's one called the Ghost Ape of Marwood, and I'm not sure, where is Marwood, John? Is it down south? I think it's somewhere.
Oh, Marwood.
Yeah.
No, I'm getting confused.
No, Marwood.
It's south side of Dartmoor.
Oh, okay, yeah. Just outside Dartmoor, you have this place called Marwood, where several centuries ago, people would see this spectral ape in the woods, and it became known as the Ghost Ape of Marwood. And this folk tale developed around it, suggesting that it was a pet that was owned by a local landowner, and then it died, and then its ghost haunted the woods. But John's made the good point in the past that, you know, which came first, the legend or the sighting, or was the legend of this, you know, that it was a pet that died and then its ghost came back? Was that a story invented to try and explain why people were seeing spectral apes in the woods? So, you know, it's kind of a grey area right now, but certainly this case, the man monkey of Ranton and the Shropshire Canal, that fits to a T, if you like, these similar reports of ghostly apes around the country. So that's the canal. It's the sort of area where I suppose something, you know, spooky could be seen. It is like a spooky location. And again, that's another shot of the canal where the creature was seen. And throughout the years, from 1879 through to the present day, there have been a handful of reports, sort of 6 or 7, and I recount these in the book. What happened was between 1986 and about, I think it was early 2001, late 2000, I interviewed probably, I think, 6 people who said they'd seen the same creature at various times. And there was one report from the 1940s, there was one from the 1960s, a couple from the 70s, one from the 80s, and there's a website called waterscape.com, and they've also recounted on their website reports from people who've contacted them who have been, you know, fishing on the canal or boating on the canal and also seen this same creature. That's the roadway from the top. That little gate that you see on the right, that's where you go down to get to the canal. And obviously the roadway looks different to today, but back in 1879, that's the actual stretch of roadway where the guy said he saw this creature. And that's it from the other angle. Again, either side you've got the canal. So you can well imagine, I guess, you know, more than 100 years ago, late at night, with this track-type roadway. It probably would like be a spooky location, no street lights, just the moonlight, and pulling this cart, and then suddenly this weird creature jumps out of nowhere. Now, I mentioned that there have been various other sightings of the man-monkey throughout the years. One interesting one surfaced in 1986, and this story came from a couple who were driving past this castle, which is called Chartley Castle in Staffordshire. And Staffordshire and Shropshire border each other, so, you know, again, you're never far from the Shropshire Union Canal when you're in North Staffordshire looking into these various reports. And the couple in question had been driving along the main road that runs parallel with Chartley Castle, 1986, and they saw this huge stag just literally amble across the road and had to slow down and wait for it to cross. And they said as it did, that this like 4 to 5 foot monkey-like creature jumped out, wildly running across the road, and just stopped in the middle of the road and charged their vehicle. Now, this is very similar to the man-monkey story in the sense that most of the reports that we have on record are of this creature attacking people, not literally physically assaulting them or anything like that, but charging them, if you like, almost. In the 1879 report, we have the creature jumping out and lunging at the guy's cart. 100 years later, at Chartley Castle, we have the creature attacking a vehicle. And this is something that is paralleled in nearly every report that I found, that there was this almost like a supernatural assault is the best way I can describe it, where it was almost, I guess, almost trying to create fear in the person, but at the last minute backing away and not actually causing any physical harm. And the couple told me about how, I think it was about 11 o'clock at night, they were driving past the castle, the creature jumped out, the guy panicked, stalled the car engine, tried to start it, and then ended up flooding the engine, and they were just stood there or sat there in the road while this creature was just wildly staring at them and then just ran off into the fields. They'd never seen anything like it before, obviously, and never seen anything like it since. But there's an interesting follow-up to this, and that, as you can see, is a crop circle. Well, that crop circle was found last summer in 2006, and although I live in Dallas, me and my wife spent most of last year living back here, and it was actually Matthew who phoned me to let me know that this circle had appeared, and because we were staying in Staffordshire at the time, he said, you know, why don't you go up and have a look at it? And I said, well, where is it? And he said, oh, it's up by Chartley Castle. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because that was precisely where, years before, I'd interviewed this couple who said that they'd seen the man-monkey, if you like, in the vicinity of Chartley Castle. But where you've got that, and then the difference between where that is, it's just literally the other side of those trees. So, you know, again, you have a location which is an intriguing location. You've got an ancient castle, you have a hairy creature, and then 20 years later in the same area, you have a crop circle. And that's not the only mystery as well. As you can, that's me holding, of all things, a peacock feather, which was found on the edge of the crop circle. Literally dozens of peacock feathers just lying around. Now, peacocks have an unusual folkloric history as well. One of the theories is that the feathers on the peacock, where you have like the eye formation, it's supposedly seen as being like an evil eye, and some people see it as having like occult links and things like this. And one of the theories that was put to me, purely speculatively, was that this was a man-made crop circle and that somebody was dabbling in occult practices within the circle, and that the peacock feathers were evidence that this was going on. Whether or not that's the case, I don't know. But again, it's interesting from my perspective at least, that this should manifest in the same place where this spectral ape-like creature also manifested. That's the main road that connects the Staffordshire towns of Cannock and Rugeley, which cuts through the Cannock Chase. Now, the Cannock Chase is a large area of forest in central England that some of you may know of. And there have been a lot of reports, again, of sort of man-monkey type encounters on the Cannock Chase. And again, pretty much all of them involve sightings of creatures lunging out at cars late at night. And one of the most famous ones involved a guy, or a young chap named Craig Blackmore, in late 2002. And Craig was driving home across the Chase, and suddenly he reported this hairy creature jumping out at the car, didn't know what it was, frightened him out of his wits, and he just shot off home as soon as he could. This story is published in several local newspapers. And again, it had all the attributes of these classic cases from the canal of some sort of creature reacting violently to the presence of a person and putting the fear of God in them, if you like. And another report that I investigated, a lady named Jackie Houghton, and this was published in a newspaper years and years ago in England initially. And she'd been actually driving on this specific stretch, and where you have the bus stop sign on the right, when she was just going past that, I think it was something like midnight. She worked as a waitress at the time at a restaurant and finished her shift. You know, they cleaned the restaurant up, and it was sort of 12, 1 in the morning when she was driving home. And this thing lunged out, again scared her to death, ambled across the road and vanished. And she didn't know what it was, but headlights obviously picked up something that pretty much looked like this. And again, the Cannock Chase, you know, it's a large area of forest land, but again, there's no way that a race of creatures like that could really exist in there. It's just not possible. And so, I catalogued all these stories, catalogued them, looked into them, interviewed the witnesses, tried to see what I could find out, and to see if I could come to any sort of conclusions as to what was going on or what wasn't going on, I guess maybe in some senses more importantly. And the Cannock Chase, again, is an interesting location because of its folklore and its history. There have been a lot of reports on the Cannock Chase of black cats, ghostly black devil dogs, like the classic black dogs of Old English folklore, Bigfoot type encounters, and just recently, in the last few months, there's been a spate of werewolf type reports, and these have all emanated from a place called the German Cemetery. And the German Cemetery on the Cannock Chase, it's called the German Cemetery because in the First World War, a lot of German prisoners were held nearby, and they all died there was a flu outbreak in the area and killed hundreds of them, and they were all buried at this particular cemetery. And so you get a lot of spooky, weird activity there, and just recently there have been a spate of so-called werewolf-like encounters, which the press in the area, in the Chase Post newspaper, have covered quite vigorously. And not too far away from the cemetery, you have this place called Shugborough Hall. Now, Shugborough Hall has also been the location of one particular encounter, which I'll tell you about, which is pretty much paralleled almost identically the man-monkey story, the original one. Now, what's interesting about this Shugborough Hall is its name. Shugborough Hall is the borough of the Shug. And the Shug, the word Shug actually ties in a lot of stories of black dogs and weird creatures. For example, in Rendlesham Forest, of all places that Larry and Peter were talking about, where Larry's encounter occurred, they have something known as the Shug monkey, which has been described as like a cross between a monkey and a large mastiff, almost like a two-legged, four-legged creature that's been seen roaming the woods. And you have the black dog, for example, Black Shuck. And there have been various theories as to where these words shug, shuck, shuggy, another one, which I've also got mentioned in the book, where this comes from. And some people postulated that it could be like an Old English term that used to mean demon. So it's interesting that this hall is specifically called Shugborough Hall, the borough of the Shug. And that Shugborough Hall, it goes back, it's got a long history, intriguing place, a lot of secrets surrounding Shugborough Hall. There's a strange inscription on one of the monuments there called the Shepherd's Monument, which has supposedly been linked with the Holy Grail and the secrets of the so-called money pit in Canada, which some of you might know about, and it supposedly links with the treasure that's hidden in the money pit. And, let me just go back. Now, in 1981, there was a story of a sighting of a creature at Shugborough Hall that, again, very, very closely fitted that of the man-monkey. And at the back of Shugborough Hall, I don't think I've got the picture here, but let me have a look. No, I don't. But okay, just to the right of it behind, there's this old, like a Chinese-type bridge that was built, and it's kind of like a Chinese theme garden almost, it looks like. And back in 1981, there was a creature very much like the man-monkey seen at this particular bridge. It didn't cause any damage, but somebody saw the creature wildly running across the lawns of the hall late at night, spooked them out, didn't know what was going on, reported it, and several other reports surfaced, one from the 1960s as time went on. People came forward and said, well, I knew about something in the woods and the forest surrounding Shugborough Hall back then. And this particular bridge where the encounter occurred, I said it's pretty much paralleled the old 1879 case with this creature wildly running around, lunging into the water, then vanishing in the vicinity of the bridge. Now that's the British Telecom Tower on the Cannock Chase, and that ties in with the man-monkey story as well, because one of the things that's been found or linked with the sightings of the man monkey is animal sacrifice. And that might kind of sound strange, but there have been various reports from the Cannock Chase of people doing animal sacrifice in occult practices and things like that. And it's in the same location that these weird spectral apes have appeared. Now that, as I said, that's the British Telecom Tower. And on at least 2 occasions, I think the first one was, I think the late 80s, and I think the other one was 97, I'd have to check, but I think that was the times. The animals were found dead and mutilated under very weird circumstances. In one case, can you turn that light off? Thanks.
Just got to do it so we can get a decent picture of you lecturing to go with the publicity.
Oh, okay. Do you need to get it now then? Is that better? Yeah, it was just right at me, that was all.
Is that better, Mark?
But yeah, what happened was that on 2 occasions, animals were found dead and mutilated under very weird circumstances. One case, 5 foxes were found disemboweled, but literally laid out in a circle with their entrails connecting the bodies, and part of an old candle found, and literally just to the right of where the telecom tower is. And another case, a dead deer was found, and one of the theories was that it had been hit by a car, but if it was, it had literally dragged itself for something like 700 or 800 feet, which sounds kind of unusual, and again it looked like its internal organs had been laid out rather than just having, you know, been pulverized in some sort of accident. And again, this is just right behind those trees as well. You have the German cemetery where all these other weird animals have been seen. So again, the point I'm trying to stress in these cases is it's never as straightforward as just seeing a weird creature. There's a lot of other weird stuff going on as well. Rituals and rites, these so-called window areas where it seems a whole range of weird phenomena all manifest in one particular location. Now, I mentioned, for example, Shugborough Hall and these creatures like the shug monkey and black shuck. Well, one of the stories that I investigated for the book involved this place. This is the Tay Bridge in Scotland. And the Tay Bridge in Scotland has a famous history, I guess if you're Scottish, because it actually collapsed in 1879. What's interesting is that the year that the man monkey was first seen in England was 1879 at this bridge. Then in 1879 in Scotland, in December, the Tay Bridge collapsed. But a few months before that, people were seeing this weird hairy creature roaming around the bridge itself, which became known as the Shuggy, which S-H-U-G-G-Y, which again ties in like Shugborough Hall and Black Shuck. And what's, I guess, more interesting about this is the parallels between things like the Mothman story, where, you know, you have the Point Pleasant, Virginia story of people seeing the Mothman in the vicinity of this huge bridge, and what happens? The bridge collapses and kills dozens of people. Well, in this case, you had the Shuggy having been seen in the vicinity of the Tay Bridge, and then in December 1879, the bridge collapses and I think killed about 70 people who were riding over the bridge on a train. And one of the notable things about this is that one of the people who was supposed to be a passenger on the train had to drop out at the last minute. It was Karl Marx, and if he'd been on the train, he almost certainly would have been killed. So again, we seem to have stories that link bridges, that link water, and that link weird monkey-like creatures. And, you know, people say, well, what could this be? I think that's the last slide. Yeah. You know, people say, what could this be? Is there an explanation? You know, I've given my reasons why I don't think it's possible that there could be a living flesh and blood creature roaming around England. You know, we would see evidence of massive evidence of what the creature eats, you know, stripping bark away from trees, that sort of thing. We would just see these things more often. We wouldn't just see them in areas where, you know, rites and rituals have occurred, or near cemeteries, or near old stone circles and burial mounds. That they'd be seen at random, but they're not. So I think something else has to be going on. And one of the theories I address in the book is the theories linking something called Kelpies. Now, Kelpies are like an old Scottish legend of so-called water horses, demons that would live in the lakes and the lochs of Scotland. And the story is that the Kelpie was like a shape-shifting creature that would sort of entice passers-by or people walking past large bodies of water late at night, and they would appear in the form of a horse and try and entice the person to jump on the back of the horse, and then they would suddenly rear up and head into the lake and drown the person. Or they'd appear as like a beautiful woman, and so when the guy walks over, you know, he's walking home late at night at midnight and sees this gorgeous girl, he's going to walk over to her, and then suddenly, you know, she turns into this demon and drags him down into the lake and drowns him. So That's the theory behind the Kelpie, or the water horse. Now, the Kelpie is described, as I said, like a shape-shifting creature. It could transform itself into like a beautiful woman or a mermaid. But one of the other forms it could transform itself into was a giant hairy man. And one of the stories is that this creature would hide out in the marshes of the waterways and attack people. Now, if we go back to the original legend of the man monkey and where it was seen at this particular bridge, when the initial encounter occurred, one of the guys who was investigating it was a local police, and his employer spoke to the local police and said, you know, have you had any other reports of this creature? And the policeman said, basically, yes, we have. He said, I know exactly what that is. He said, that's the man monkey. And he said, the man monkey comes at the bridge ever since the man drowned in the cut. So what we've actually got is a story of a hairy creature having been seen where a guy had actually drowned in this same area of the canal. And of course, drowning people, or trying to drown people, was the hallmark of what the Kelpie does. It drags people down into waterways. So the theory that I followed in the book is that whatever the man monkey is, it's not a physical creature. It's some sort of shape-shifting Kelpie-type entity that was seen here, that was seen on the Tay Bridge in Scotland, that was seen near Shugborough Hall, the borough of the Shug, and that is tied in some capacity with these old tales. Now, what these things are, you know, are they some sort of tulpa-like thought form? Is it a doorway being opened to some other realm? Is it something else? I don't know, but I think the last thing it is a physical flesh and blood animal, and I think more likely it is tied in somehow with these shape-shifting legends of weird creatures from times past. And as I said, more often than not, you do find parallels with ancient waterways, ancient pathways, bridges, areas of historical and prehistoric significance. And I'm not sure how much further we can take this now beyond just collecting more information. I think we need more answers, but I think, you know, remark with John and Richard in the past, knowing that there's something paranormal, whatever that means, going on, finding the answer to it is the problem. You know, we can keep collecting reports where somebody said they saw a Bigfoot and it vanished in the flash of a light, or somebody else saw another creature near a bridge, etc., etc. I'm not sure how we answer the mystery, but, you know, I hope I've sort of given you a little bit of insight into the nature of these sightings, and that to show you how they're not what they appear to be in England, that there is something else behind these reports rather than just, you know, a flesh and blood creature like this one is supposed to be. So if anybody's got any questions, I'll be quite happy to answer. We've got a couple of minutes.
Okay, yeah, we've got a couple of minutes. I need to run around. Already, I've been completely, utterly lost myself. So this is my fifth Colorado Backroad of the weekend. My dear, this is already there. Wonderful girl. So if you can run around and microphone. Lady up. Sasha up there. Nick, we're going to take about three.
3, okay.
There's something, it reminded me of something when you were talking about the hairy man
Uh-huh.
to the waterways. It reminded me of the stories of trolls
Mm.
in children's fairy tales. They go way, way back.
Yeah.
Maybe that might be something to look into. The other thing I wanted to say was there's been a report of Bigfoot in Rendlesham Forest.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it was Brenda Butler that claims to have seen it. I don't know if you've spoken to her about that. But that, obviously, that's got all sorts of things going on. It seems to be almost like an interdimensional doorway, if you believe all reports, all
Yeah.
different things that go on there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a number of people have commented this to me about troll sightings. You know, the folklore of trolls is that they live under bridges. And again, you know, this makes me wonder if there's a tie-in, that some of these legends have a basis in fact of people seeing these creatures. I mean, there's a place down south called Monkey Marsh Loch, where again there's this legend of this monkey living in the marshes. That's where it takes its name from. So, yeah. Oh.
What's the difference of you've got a photo of the Cannon Chase telecom tower.
Yeah.
Could there be some kind of mind world ambitions
Yeah.
either causing hallucinations or setting up whatever strange thing is there?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting theory. I mean, people have said that before, that sort of technology, if you like, can be affected. I mean, John was speaking earlier about how he did some filming for the BBC and the equipment was affected. Now, that makes me wonder, makes John wonder particularly if there's some sort of electromagnetic anomaly in the area, whether made by us or whether natural, maybe potentially a tower like that could influence things. I don't sort of rule that out, and the fact that, these things occurred in that direct area, is possible. So, yeah. The lady down there.
It's not exactly the same as what you're saying. There's a weird thing that happened back in the 70s, early 70s. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. We were been to Southampton. We were travelling back to Bournemouth by car. We'd only had one drink each. I couldn't test that. We both saw very clearly. This is quite an isolated place in the middle of the forest and moorland inside. And it was quite stood back from the road. There was a very, very tall figure, 7 foot, 7'6". It wasn't hairy. It was dressed in robes. It was near Burley, which is a witchcraft centre. And it appeared to be, almost as though hailing us to try and stop us. And at the time, I would have thought if somebody wanting a lift would stop. If we start, why won't they by the side of the road?
Yeah.
They would way back on here.
Yeah.
And secondly, I just got this awful feeling. I do hope we didn't stop, and we didn't stop. About 2 miles along the road, you had this sensation of something really weird,
Well,
we assumed it was something to do with witchcraft.
Yeah.
There was apparition which had been put forth to stop people from interfering.
Well, that's interesting you talk about getting a weird feeling, because most people who see these things do get like an odd sensation sometimes. Like John had one experience and he felt like a feeling of elation. A lot of people get a fearful feeling, and it's almost as if they feel like it's instilled in them, it's created to provoke that sort of feeling and intense emotion. But again, as I said, you do get a lot of reports from this area of weird creatures associated with witchcraft and rituals. So, to me, that's sort of like another example. So, at the back.
I think Rhoda was before me, but can I just
Okay.
say, as a witch in the pagan and witches unite, witches would not put something like that up to stop people coming. I mean, sorry, I was commenting about it.
No, well, yeah.
But in folklore, yes, witches are
Yeah.
which is interesting to know about that. Without going into the whole close figure thing, just one item. I was saying to you outside, there is lots of stuff from like August, traditionally shape-shifting in British fairy lore, which no doubt Rhoda will discuss later.
Yeah, I should just emphasise, I was just using like a general term when I was talking about witchcraft or the occult. I mean, I think we need to differentiate between people who, white witches and different types of practices. But I think in general, there's been weird stuff going on with ritualistic activity in the same places where these things have been seen, regardless of the motives or whatever. So, yeah.
It seems to me that resistance of folklore don't refute the reality. Of course, there is folklore, fairy tales, and so on about any creature as a wolf, for example. There is very many folklore about relic hominoid, almasty, and so on. As Puss in Boots do not refute existence of cats, so this folklore about trolls do not refute the reality. And there are some interesting things. First of all, I don't know, maybe that's only in a picture. This creature took a stick in left hand. As I know, relic hominoid is left-handed. And the second meeting near the bridges, of course, that's a folklore about trolls and so on, but hominoid can swim very well. And he often lives in such scenes where river is near. So it seems to me that may be reality. And you say how it's possible during 10,000 years not to see this creature. Why 10,000 years? Only 200 or 300 years. Before that, folklore reality went hand by hand. But after that, that may be very rare species. If in modern Great Britain is possible to survive population of large cats, beasts of prey, so for such person may be true.
Well, I mean, you know, there is this argument, could it be flesh and blood or could it not be? I just think the argument is largely against it because of not being discovered, but I think mainly it's because these things aren't seen at random in just general forests. They're always seen near stone circles, ancient burial mounds, cemeteries. They're not seen just at random in your everyday woodland, shall we say.
Ronan wants a question.
Who?
Ronan wants a question and he's been putting his hand up for about...
Okay, Aurelia, this is the last one. You stand next to him and stop beating him around the head with that.
It's not a silly question. I never ask silly questions.
There's no such thing.
I don't know the meaning of the word silly. But actually I've got about 15 of them. First of all, are you familiar with the rather strange internet publication Wikipedia?
Yes.
I am happy to hear that. Well now, Wikipedia has produced a creature that is supposedly a British folklore creature from Cumbria. Now, I've never heard of it before, and I don't know that it's authentic, but they call it the Ichi, and they say it is an anthropoid that emerges from lakes in Cumbria in the Lake District.
Excuse me, Ronan, before you contract a big case of foot and mouth disease, that was something Charles Paxton put up as an experiment to see if people would believe in it. Some sociological monster experiment he did.
I see. Well, we'll move on from the Ichi then.
Well, I didn't know anything about it anyway, so.
Yes. The other thing I'm not terribly happy about is the use of the word troll to describe these things, because the term troll has been used so many times to describe so many different kinds of entities that it's sometimes used to describe just about everything. And I think it's so inexact, it should be avoided in books.
Well, actually, I haven't mentioned troll by name in the books. This was just in the lecture. The only parallel I would draw is the fact that there's this connection with bridges.
Well, yes.
Yeah, I don't actually think that you know, it's necessarily the same thing. But you know, I wouldn't describe that as a troll. But I think it's intriguing that hairy creatures are seen in the same places as troll reports. So.
Yes, well, I have read the three Billy Goats Gruff too, so I know about those bridges. And I think it's the sort of element we can expect Sasha to bring into the conversation. But the thing is that the term is used very loosely these days. The original trolls were giants of the kind you find in Tolkien. But these days, I believe in Scandinavia, they're little beardy creatures like myself. Endearing,
And on that note, I think we're done.
No, I haven't actually any other questions, but this does overlap slightly with the talk I'll be giving on fairies, if it ever comes about, because I am very short of material for it. If anyone has anything that might sort of make the lecture more vibrant, like pixie dust that enables them to fly around the room, I would be only too happy to hear from them. And with the amount of drinks you put back last night, Aurelia ought to be able to fly around the room without any pixie dust.
All right, well, thanks a lot. Thanks.